Okay, so last time we talked, I was hanging in a hammock by a river in Cambodia because I had sprained my knee and I couldn't ride anywhere. That was months ago. In fact, the actual knee injury incident was almost exactly 2 months ago now. Before I sprained my knee, the idea was that I was going to try and ride my KTM 690 Enduro, this is my Australian bike, back into Thailand across the border near Koh Kong. This was always going to be a dodgy proposition because, as a result of COVID, the bike had been in Cambodia for 2 years on a 30-day permit. But of course, that all became a moot point when I injured my knee and then I couldn't ride anywhere. So here's how it went down. First of all, I rocked up to the hospital in Kampot and they said to me, well, if you walked in here, it's not broken. And so that was pretty much the extent of the diagnostics. They gave me some extra strong painkillers and they said if it still hurts in 2 weeks, come back. But I'd noticed that it was kind of collapsing if I rotated my leg, and that seemed like something that was going to take more than a couple of painkillers and 2 weeks. So I took a tuk-tuk and went down to see the only physio in town. He looked at my knee and he said, listen, you've just sprained it. He said, stay off it for 3 weeks. Do not put it under any stress. Do not do any exercise for 3 weeks. Otherwise, it will not heal properly. And it was at that point that I realized I was going to be in Kampot, Cambodia for quite some time yet. Now, at first I thought, this is cool, it's only 3 weeks. I can do this. I can lay in a hammock for 3 weeks and do nothing. But this, of course, was a lie. I am no good at all at doing nothing. I found myself a place with a little bamboo hut out by the river. There was a little restaurant bar thing there, but I also had Nam24, and Nam24 is the equivalent of Uber Eats in Cambodia, but it's so much better than Uber Eats because everything is affordable. So I lay in my hammock and I stayed off my leg, and whenever I got hungry, some dude on a scooter would rock up with some food for me. It was pretty great, and I was absolutely miserable. Yes, in these times of toxic positivity and Instagram, it's fashionable to be happy all the time, but sometimes you just don't feel that way. Alright, so here is a slightly different perspective. I don't feel good now. I don't feel brilliant and happy and optimistic, and I should because I have so many things to be grateful for, but just for a moment, I'm just feeling genuinely terrible. And I'm going to hazard a guess and say that all of this enforced rest, which has meant no exercise, has not been so great for my mental health. Really, not only is motorcycling doing what I love, but it's exercise for my body, it's exercise for my mind. And it gets those endorphins flowing, and it makes me feel good without the outlet. So now it's been a week, 1.5 weeks without that outlet because it's been that long since I've been for a ride. You start to feel pretty suboptimal. Now, it's totally okay to not be doing great sometimes, but it's also really important to be able to recognize that and to ask for help when you need it. And so that's how I ended up rooming with my friend Jenna in Kampot for a month. I only met Jenna a few days before I hurt my knee. She's on the timing team for the Enduro race, and she's this cool dirt biking chick, and we hit it off immediately. When I hurt my knee, she was so kind to me. She went to the hospital with me, she helped me with translations, she helped me find everything I needed in Kampot. She even did grocery shopping for me so that I didn't have to hobble around on my leg. And she said to me straight away, I have a spare room. If you want to, you're welcome to move in while you recover. And I was so touched because this is such a huge thing. You're inviting some virtual stranger to come and invade the private space of your home, your sanctuary, and become part of your life for weeks on end. Now, Jenna has had the experience of getting injured in a foreign country before, and so maybe she knew something that I didn't. But anyway, at first I was all independent and I didn't want to impose. I said, no, it's fine. I'll just get myself a bamboo hut by the river and I'll be cool. Come and see me sometimes. We'll have beers. It'll be great. Anyway, as you saw, a week and a half later, I'm in my bamboo hut and I just feel miserable. And I don't even know why. But I did know that it wasn't good. So that was when I reached out to Jenna and I took her up on her extremely kind offer and we became roommates in her beautiful home in Kampot. It was me and Jenna and Bullet, her adorable dog. And so the weeks went by with really good company, and I worked on my website and I behaved myself and stayed off my knee as instructed. And it did get progressively better, but after 3 weeks, it absolutely had not healed. And that's because everyone was wrong. I had not merely sprained my knee, I had partially torn a ligament. I didn't know this at the time, I just knew that my knee was not better yet. After a few weeks, Jenna helped me to go back and pick up my KTM and I rode it back to her house. But the knee was still a shady proposition. It just did not have the strength it needed to have, and when I bent it, it hurt. So I extended my visa and I stayed an extra week longer. But eventually I knew I had to get back to Thailand. I was booked to run a road tour and there's only so long you can go without income. So I started packing up my stuff and I made a plan. There were 2 factors I had to cater for. The first one was that I didn't know how good my knee was going to be. After a day of riding, would I still be able to ride or would I be in trouble? The second factor was that I didn't even know if they were going to let me across the border into Thailand when I got to Koh Kong. Thailand has obscure rules for foreign vehicles with which I may or may not be in compliance. So not only was getting out of Cambodia going to be a gamble because the bike had been in the country for 2 years, but getting into Thailand was also going to be a little bit of a toss-up. There was an excellent chance that I would get turned back at the border. And then where would I go? I had 2 options. I could then head north and try the border at Chom, or I could then head even further north and try the border with Laos at Stung Treng. Both of these options would mean basically riding back across Cambodia again, and see earlier comments about the dodgy state of my knee. So I called up my friend and loyal business partner in Chiang Mai, and I said to him, listen, I'm going to need a rescue mission. I said, I don't know how long I'm going to be able to ride for, and I don't even know if I'm going to be able to cross the border. Can you please bring the truck and pick me and the bike up? This was a big ask because Chiang Mai is about a 12-hour drive away from the border that I was heading towards. And if they didn't let me cross into Thailand at that border, I would then need him to cross into Cambodia with the truck and come and drive me across Cambodia and possibly even across Laos before going home to Chiang Mai. It is a lot to ask, and he immediately agreed. So I loaded up the bike and I waved goodbye to Jenna and I said, I'll see you in Thailand unless they knock me back at the border, in which case I'll be right back here in 2 days. And then I set out to ride the 200 and something kilometers from Kampot to Koh Kong. And that brings me to the riding footage which you've been watching for the last 10 minutes. As you can see, Cambodia does not have the smoothest roads all the time. In fact, if you've got an injured knee and you can't stand up on the bike properly, they are agony. Now, my knee was mostly fine by this stage when it was extended, but when it was bent, it hurt like a mofo. And sitting with my knee bent on the bike, riding across endless potholes for more than 200 kilometers was absolutely not what the doctor ordered. Normally, I would just fly over roads like this. This is why I have a 690 Enduro so that I can run over everything. But this time, after about 100 kilometers of this, I was in serious pain. By the end of the afternoon, I was riding along, yelling inside my helmet swear words at the top of my voice, just for the analgesic effect. Which is one of the many reasons why the audio has been erased from this recording. Once you pass Sihanoukville, there's really nowhere to stop on the road to Koh Kong, unless you want to camp in some seriously sketchy bushes. But even finding suitable sketchy bushes is difficult because there are villages and people everywhere. I don't mind camping alone in the middle of nowhere, but I certainly don't like being discovered by people in the middle of the night. I was also on a schedule to meet my friend from Chiang Mai at the border, and this was important too because I needed to get myself back to Chiang Mai in time to run the road tour that I had scheduled. If I got knocked back at the border and couldn't get into Thailand and we had to drive across Cambodia and maybe drive across Laos, it was going to take us quite a long time to get back to Chiang Mai, which was where the tour would start. Now, you might be wondering why I think I can run a tour in this state if I can't ride across Cambodia and Laos. The answer is these roads in Thailand are much better than the ones in Cambodia. It was a 3-day road tour. On smooth roads, on my CBR, I wouldn't have to stand up and I wouldn't have to deal with these potholes. I had my fingers crossed, but I was pretty sure I would be alright if I could just make it back in time. On the way to Koh Kong, you cross just a little bit, just the edge of the Cardamom Mountains, which is such a lovely change because most of Cambodia is really flat. So you head up into the mountains and it gets a little bit cooler and you start to get some actual corners, which is absolutely delightful. If I hadn't nearly been crying with pain by this stage, I would have really enjoyed it. Look at that blue sky and everything. A rare pleasure during the rainy season. My original plan was to stay in Koh Kong overnight, and then the next day I would have another 30 k's to go to a really quite remote border crossing, which I had passed by before. For the purposes of me getting my bike out of Cambodia and into Thailand with minimal hassle, I was thinking that the best thing would be the smallest border possible. However, this small border crossing was about 20 kilometers down a pretty sketchy dirt road, and as I rode into Koh Kong, this beautiful blue sky faded and the rain started to fall. It did not fall like lovely light English summer rain. It fell like the Cambodian monsoon that it was. And that night, as I huddled in my hotel room, I could hear the thunder of water from the sky. That's when I knew that my plan for the small border crossing was toast. The track out there is rutted red clay, and you can imagine how slippery it gets with a bit of rain. Ordinarily, I'd be prepared to give it a red hot go, but this time I knew that with my knee in the condition it was in, I was not capable of lifting my bike without hurting myself. Similarly, if I put my foot down to try and save myself from a fall, I could really damage my knee again. I had to let it heal first. And that meant I would have to try my chances at the big border crossing at Hat Lek instead. As the rain fell, I felt my chances of getting into Thailand falling as well. After a night of sleep and anti-inflammatories, I was feeling kind of okay the next morning, and I psyched myself up to give the border a red hot go. Now, you must always approach international border crossings with the utmost of equanimity. If you show up tired and impatient and hungry, things are not going to go well. Don't be the guy who's standing at the immigration booth yelling at the officials. You have to remember that you don't have the right to go into anyone else's country. It's always a privilege, and you're always a guest. If, like me, you are also trying to cross into their country with a foreign registered vehicle using paperwork written in a completely different language, then you're going to be doubly beholden to their kindness. If they want you to fill in 27 pieces of paperwork, 23 of which are identical, and sign the corner of every page, then you're going to do it with a smile and then you're going to say thank you. I've said it once and I'll say it again. Always make sure that you've eaten and hydrated before you go anywhere near a border crossing. Now, I'm not going to show you footage of the border crossing itself, first of all, because that would be pretty boring because paperwork, and paperwork, but also because people at border crossings don't tend to take very kindly to being recorded. Unless it's, of course, for the purposes of their own private TikTok account. Anyway, I showed up to the Cambodian side and I tried to go to customs first to get my bike stamped out because I didn't know if they would let me go, and I only had a single entry visa, so I didn't want my single entry visa cancelled before I knew I could actually exit with my bike. However, customs seemed totally disinterested and they just said that I had to go to immigration first. However, that isn't what I did. What I did is I walked across the border to go and check with customs on the other side. Now, it's always a good idea to make sure the border guards know what you're doing before you actually do this, so that you don't get arrested or shot for illegally crossing to a different country. Not that anyone is really caring or paying attention in Southeast Asia, but I imagine there are some other border crossings where the guards might have no chill. So I walked across and I gave my carnet to the customs people in Thailand, and they recognized the carnet and they said, "Yep, no problem. We'll process this just as soon as you've come over and done your immigration." I couldn't believe my luck. Everyone was just saying yes today. So I walked back to Cambodia, I stamped out of Cambodian immigration, and then I rocked back up to Cambodian customs with my carnet, which was stamped into Cambodia 2 years ago before COVID. Now, when you enter Cambodia, they ordinarily give you a 30-day temporary import permit. What happens when you've been illegally in the country for 2 years? Well, technically, your bike could go away. Your bike could be seized by customs, or you could have to pay some kind of heinous fine. I was secretly expecting that maybe I would have to pay some kind of heinous bribe. But you know what actually happened this day? Absolutely nothing. They stamped my carnet and told me to have a nice day. So I grabbed my paperwork and I got the hell out of Cambodia. This right here is a picture of victory. This is my KTM parked in no man's land. Up ahead through that gate is Thailand, and behind me, far behind me, is Cambodia. 2 hours and 1 electricity blackout later, I was in Thailand. I could not believe it. There was Pilar waiting for me with the truck. There were the beautiful roads of Thailand, smooth and unpotholed, stretching ahead of me. I could not believe it. My knee was aching, so we put the bike on the back of the truck and I breathed a sigh of relief, and that was when I could finally relax. Everything was going to be just fine.